All right, I guess we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar in honor of Global Biosimilars Week, hosted by the Center for Biosimilars in partnership with the International Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association. I am Skylar Jeremias, Assistant Managing Editor of the Center for Biosimilars, and we're delighted to have you join us for an engaging discussion on this year's theme, Advancing Access to Biosimilars. Despite the undeniable progress in biosimilars approvals, hurdles such as complex and diverse regulatory frameworks and duplicative clinical studies continue to delay broader patient access and inflate healthcare costs. Addressing these challenges is crucial to expanding global access to affordable biologic therapies. Today's session will focus on streamlining biosimilar development and regulatory requirements. We will explore how recent advances in regulatory science support the development of biosimilars based on robust analytical, physiochemical, and functional data and clinical pharmacokinetic studies rather than routine comparative clinical efficacy studies, which often provide no additional regulatory value. This is a key position championed by the IGBA. Comparative efficacy studies, which traditionally rely on conventional endpoints, are less sensitive than analytical and PK studies in detecting meaningful differences between a biosimilar and its reference product. Scientific evidence now strongly suggests that such studies can be foregone without compromising the safety, efficacy, or immunogenicity of biosimilars. This position fits seamlessly with the revisions to the WHO guideline and supports efforts to improve global access to high-quality, safe, and effective biosimilars. Our expert panel will also discuss how these streamlined regulatory approaches, complemented by global harmonization of requirements, can reduce unnecessary duplication of studies across different regions. The unnecessary repetition of clinical trials, especially when a reference product is identical across jurisdictions, adds delays, costs, and unnecessary exposes patients to clinical studies that offer to no new information for regulatory decision-making. Several key points will frame today's discussion. One, the latest regulatory science shows that analytical studies combined with clinical PK and immunogenicity data are much more sensitive than conventional efficacy studies in identifying clinically meaningful differences between biosimilars and reference products. Two, global regulatory experience in highly regulated markets has demonstrated that clinical comparative efficacy studies are not predictive of the approval or success of biosimilars. And three, in many cases, regulatory authorities are prioritizing moving away from clinical trials that do not contribute to approval decisions. Streamlining these requirements will accelerate market access and enhance global affordability. Our speakers will dive into these critical themes with a particular focus on how the IGBA's streamlined regulatory approach can support the wider adoption of biosimilars worldwide, ensuring patients have access to affordable and effective biologic treatments. This is especially pertinent as the demand for cost-effective healthcare solutions continues to grow. Before we get started, please remember that there will be a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. You're encouraged to submit questions throughout the webinar using the chat function below. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Giuseppe Randazzo, co-chair of the IGBA Biosimilars Committee, who will guide us through today's session.
Thank you, Skylar. Greatly appreciate the introduction, and thank you for that opening. Very well said. Good day, everyone. Hi, my name is Giuseppe Randazzo, and I am the Senior Vice President of Sciences and Regulatory Affairs at the Association for Accessible Medicines. That is the United States Generic and Biosimilar Trade Association, but we are a member of the broader IGBA. And we'll talk briefly about IGBA with some slides. And before we get going in any of that, I would like to take a moment to introduce our esteemed panelists and thank them for being here. What I'll do is I'm going to give you the bios. They'll say hello so you can see them, and then we'll get into our program, and I'll describe that briefly as well. So first, I'd like to welcome Dr. Ali Al-Maiden. And Dr. Ali has played a pivotal role in the regulation of pharmaceuticals in Saudi Arabia, including the registration of more than 2,000 pharmaceutical products and the development of biosimilars. He holds a doctorate in biotechnology and has made significant contribution to drug safety pricing, and market authorization, while leading key collaboration initiatives with international regulatory authorities. He currently serves as a senior consultant on research and innovation at the Saudi Food and Drug Authority. Dr. Ali?
Thank you, Giuseppe. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Welcome, sir. Thank you, sir. Next, I would like to introduce Ivana Knedsevic. Hope I pronounced that well, Ivana. Ivana is a scientist and team leader based in Switzerland with norms and standards for biologicals for HPS, MPH at the World Health Organization, of course, the WHO. She joined WHO in September 2000 and is devoted to the standardization and evaluation of biologicals at the global level. Notably, in 2012, she created a network of the collaborating centers that continue to play a leading scientific and regulatory role at national and global levels. Ivana, say hello, please.
Thank you for the invitation. Glad to join the panel, and very good pronunciation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Next, we have Dr. Peter Richardson. Peter is a senior quality specialist and BMWP secretary at the European Medicines Agency, or EMA. He is a pharmacist with a PhD in pharmaceutics and has worked in industry in the area of drug delivery and controlled release systems. He worked at the MHRA as an assessor for small and large molecules and has been serving with EMA since 2004. Peter, say hello, please.
So thank you, Giuseppe. It's a pleasure to be with you from Amsterdam. Looking forward to the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, sir. Appreciate you. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Sarah Yim. Dr. Sarah Yim, or Sarah, has been serving with the US FDA since 2005 and is currently the director of the Office of Therapeutic Biologics and Biosimilars in CDER's Office of New Drugs, affectionately OTBB. And she is based in Washington, D.C. Previously, Dr. Yim spent 2 years as director of the Division of Clinical Review in the Office of Generic Drugs and 11 years in Rheumatology Regulatory Review. Following her postdoctoral fellowship in rheumatology at the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Disease, that is a mouthful, Sarah, at the National Institute of Health. Sarah, can you kindly say hello?
That is a mouthful. That's why I always refer to it as NIAMS myself. But thank you for the invitation and happy to be here.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you all the panelists. So before we get to our panelists, let me give you a brief description of how the program will be run. I'm going to go through a few slides, not very many, and somewhat relatively quickly to describe IGBA and who we are, and then go over a little bit of the work that one of the committees, the Biosimilar Committee, does within IGBA. After that, we're going to shoot it over to the panel, and we're going to have a Q&A session of this webinar for the panelists. We have some questions, and of course, as Skylar mentioned, we offer the chat box for audience questions as well. With that, I would like to start my presentation, and I hope we can get that on the screen. I don't know if, can people see the slides? I don't know. Bear with me. My apologies to the audience who is watching. We're trying to work on getting the slides on the screen. We're getting a lot of people in the so the chat box works because we're getting people saying no, they can't. And now I see a yes. So I believe people can see the slides. Okay, great. So I'm going to start. And if you could kindly advance the slides for me, that would be great. So number one, again, IGBA, as mentioned, and this is the Global Biosimilar Week. This is one of the bigger elements from my perspective of the Global Biosimilar Week. We have a webinar. And again, in this particular one, we're lucky enough to get folks from around the globe who can speak about biosimilars. So I'm going to take a brief moment and talk about IGBA. So you've heard the acronym a few times now, IGBA, and that is the International Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association. It was founded in March 1997, originally as the International Generic Pharmaceutical Alliance, and then renamed IGBA, International Generic and Biosimilar Medicines Association, in September 2015. They're legally incorporated in Geneva. We were admitted as ICH Assembly member in 2016, and then an ICH Management Committee member since 2018. We are accredited with WIPO and as an observer since September 2019. Additionally, we were admitted as a non-state actor in official relations with WHO in January 2022. We maintain dialogue with folks and individuals and societies across the globe. For example, we maintain a constant dialogue and work with WHO, WTO, and WIPO and other national and regional and international bodies. We wanted to give you a snapshot of who we are as IGBA. As you can see, we have 8 full members, and the next slide will show you exactly where these members are located. We have 8 full members. We have 7 associate members and 1 observer or an observer status. The more interesting slide from my perspective is this. As you can see, IGBA is an association that maintains a membership of other global parties across the globe. You can see the number of them spread everywhere from North to South America, to Africa, to Asia, to Europe, Australia, etc. This is a real nice slide that shows you where those memberships and where those members are across the globe. I'd like to thank Nicholas and Carlotta of IGBA who helped with these slides. Now we'll get a little bit into the biosimilar part. And what I wanted to talk about here is just speak briefly about the journey of biosimilars. And as many of you know who are in this space, of course, different health authorities across the globe have had biosimilars earlier than others. Yet this is a snapshot of the current approvals of biosimilars around the globe. And as you can see, along with this journey, which has been many years for quite a few individuals, they have and we have made quite substantial progress globally. So this shows you from the US, again, to South America, across the globe, over to Asia, Europe, etc., the number of approvals globally. Now, the interesting thing we'll get into is approvals, of course, is a little different than access, which we'll probably talk more about as we go through the presentation, or excuse me, panel conversation. Before we shoot it over to the Q&A portion of the presentation or of the program, I want to talk briefly about the Biosimilar Committee and what we do here with IGBA. Along with members, we work on trying to advance access to biosimilars. And as we've gone through this, what we do is we try to develop positions and policies and advocacy positions to increase access to biosimilars. We also do things in an effort to actually develop and streamline, for example, development of biosimilars. You can use this link in the program to give you an idea of what we've done over the last 10 to 13 years from a biosimilar committee perspective at IGBA. But I wanted to take a moment to pinpoint a couple of recent publications, which you will see on our website. Recent publications include IGBA identifies streamlined development through reduced comparative clinical studies and appropriate use of global comparator products as a key to greater biosimilar access. That was released in July 2024. We also have position on streamlined development in April 2024. And the last one of our more recent ones as well, support of global comparator for biosimilars, waiving bridging studies concerning local versus global reference products. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, but save the majority for the Q&A. But I want to dig a little bit deeper in IGBA's current position on streamlined development. From our perspective, we believe enhanced use of analytical studies, complemented by clinical PK studies to detect differences between a candidate biosimilar and a reference product rather than CES or comparative efficacy studies using conventional or pharmacodynamic endpoints. We believe in highly regulated markets, experience has shown that the use of clinical comparative efficacy to demonstrate efficacy has not been predictive of an approval of a biosimilar. And the concern that in the absence of a comparative efficacy and safety results, a biosimilar candidate might be inappropriately approved based solely on evidence from quality and clinical PK studies is simply not supported by the latest data. And finishing up, I'll touch briefly on a single global comparator. A single original biological product is used as the reference for subsequent biosimilars, even if sourced from more than one country. Initial approval of a biosimilar in one region is generally supported by the same quality, non-clinical and pivotal clinical study dataset used elsewhere, and with a single approved manufacturing process. Any biological product produced by the same developer and marketed around the globe can be considered of comparable quality and equivalent in terms of quality, safety, and efficacy when approved by a stringent regulatory authority. And lastly, single global development is more efficient and can enable greater patient access in a more timely fashion. with this, I thank you for allowing me to present a few slides. And I also want to once again, thank you to the individuals who helped put together the slides, Nicholas and Carletta. We appreciate it. And this is where we get to the more fun portion of the webinar. And we'll get to some Q&As. So as we get into the Q&As, I'm going to do my best to look at the audience chat. I also have some prepared here to start off the Q&A, and I will open with those. First, I invite Ivana into the conversation. Ivana, can you tell us what is WHO's role in the context of biosimilars?
Thank you. Well, for those who are familiar with WHO biological standardization, which is actually one of the oldest programs of WHO, which is more than 70 years in place to assist WHO member states, it is clear that WHO has an advisory role, and advising 194 member states requires certain flexibility because WHO standards need to be adopted and used by all countries. This is the basis of the concept in which WHO is actually providing basis for setting and updating national regulatory requirements. So in that context, actually the work on biosimilars started in 2007. 2006, actually, we started developing the idea following on EMA, that was actually the first regulatory agency that provided guidance on biosimilars. So since 2007, our work was really focused on clarifying terminology, providing standards, putting in place pre-qualification, which is very important for the access to these products. And also giving the opportunity to regulators and manufacturers and other health professionals to work together through the implementation workshops, because we realized a long time ago, and it's not related just to biosimilars, it's related to vaccines and all biologicals, that it's not enough to provide guidance. In particular, when these guidance are supposed to serve 194 member states' needs, they have to be pretty general. So that's why we actually put in place the mechanism to facilitate implementation while recognizing and always emphasizing the role of the national regulatory authority. So WHO's approach to ensure quality, safety, and efficacy of biologicals is based on the role of national regulatory authority, which is the main decision-making body, and WHO is just advising and facilitating this. So the current role of WHO is going from the terminology, nomenclature, standards, pre-qualification, manufacturing, and also this is the entire toolkit that we provide. Comparing to 2006, when we started, it was just development of standards. The first standard was guidelines published in 2009, adopted by the Expert Committee on Biological Standardization, which was actually updated in April 2022. And we are now looking forward to hearing from users of WHO standards what is most needed at this point in time and how we can actually continue providing the guidance and assistance to WHO member states. Over.
Thank you, Ivana. Appreciate that. And I'm sure as we go through more questions, we'll get into a little bit of that April 2022 release of the new guideline. I appreciate your response. And Peter, let me ask you a question. If you don't mind, can you take a few moments to discuss some of the recent activities related to biosimilars in the EU?
Sure, thank you. So I think as Ivana mentioned, we've been at it for some time, and we're probably around about 20 years now into biosimilars. And I think the last count we tallied up in September, we had over 190 marketing authorization applications, and we're somewhere between 110 and 120 approved products. So it's grown considerably over the years, and it continues to accelerate actually. And quite a lot of the business of the agency on biologicals is biosimilar applications. We've had a little bit of a reorganization within the agency, and we're working in more streamlined domains, in fact, they're called. So what has been interesting is that the Biosimilars Working Party, which used to be more managed by the therapeutic areas or the clinical colleagues, is now actually in the quality domain. And I think that's a good reflection of the the movement towards emphasis on quality, and it fits with the sort of current dynamic in biosimilars with the focus on quality, really. In addition, for your audience might not necessarily be aware, but within the network of the regulatory framework within Europe, the member states are represented at an organization called Heads of Medicines Agencies. And that group also has a working group on biosimilars and has been quite active in recent times. And it's been more focused on trying to get a feel of the market, let's say, and what are the barriers or hurdles to uptake, and what can be done to facilitate, in some cases, a little bit of a disparate uptake of biosimilars across Europe. So last year, I think one of the things that was quite positive, and it was in fact a little bit of a barrier to uptake, let's say from a regulatory perspective, was the concept of interchangeability and whether we can just switch from one biosimilar to another. And the Heads of Medicines Agencies with the agency EMA have been able to publish a small paper just to emphasize that that's the accepted practice, and that the experience, I think, with biosimilars now, there's been no real concern at all with biosimilars in terms of safety and immunogenicity compared to the reference products, and there can be an assured switch of a biosimilar with its reference product. So I think that's found quite a useful place in terms of steering assurance within the users within the European network. And in fact, it's still quite a lot of communication required within the European Union to satisfy maybe local needs, and that's part of what HMA has been doing with the EMA. Recently, there's been a number of surveys with the patients, consumers, the healthcare professionals, industry, and the regulatory authorities on what are their specific communication needs in terms of getting the message across and providing assurance. So there's been a drive towards developing a little bit of a toolkit which will serve to satisfy that. And additionally, the translation of those communication activities is quite a substantial challenge. So that's another aspect which has been pushed forward quite a lot. And then for me, specifically working with the Biosimilars Working Party, we have published a concept paper which outlines our sort of intention to progress with regulatory science thinking on the streamlined or tailored approach. It's been coined that way in Europe. So we're now through into drafting of a reflection paper, and that's an ongoing process. And we could talk more about that as we go. Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you, Peter. Very helpful. Let me now turn it over to Ali. Ali, you sit as one of the co-chairs for IPRP along with Dr. Sarian. How important is it from your perspective to align regulatory frameworks across regions to facilitate smoother market entry for biosimilars?
Thank you, Joseph. As you mentioned, aligning the regulatory frameworks will facilitate smoother market entry for biosimilars. In the Biosimilars Working Group, we focus on fostering collaboration among regulatory agencies to address mainly the complexities of biosimilar development in the last years. We think that the harmonized guidelines or the eventual harmonized guidelines will reduce, first of all, duplication or double work. It will streamline the approval process. And it will also promote reliance between regulators, ensuring consistent standards and faster patient access to biosimilars. Of course, this alignment at the end of the day will benefit patients globally by improving access to high quality biosimilars while also supporting the market growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your response, sir. And last but certainly not least, once again, let's talk to Dr. Sarah Yim. Hi, Sarah. You know, the FDA may have gotten into the biosimilar game a little later than some, for example, like the EU. However, FDA has seen great progress. And over the last few years, it's seen wonderful progress. And approvals have steadily increased. Can you tell us a little about this journey thus far?
Sure, thanks. One of the joys of having a last name that starts with Y, right? I'm always last. Yeah, FDA's journey has really been quite an evolution. I think most of the audience probably knows that FDA's legislation for biosimilars really wasn't enacted until 2010. So we sort of were late to the game, but we were thinking about it a long time, just as the other organizations and regulatory authorities have. I think at the beginning we were we didn't quite know what to expect, and there was a lot of I think worst case scenario thinking, and just a cautious beginning, and that's pretty characteristic of FDA. But as we have reviewed and approved more and more of these products, I think we've seen an increasing comfort level, both with the process itself and also with some of the underlying science. Clinicians like to look at clinical data, and right now the biosimilars are homed with the reference products in the therapeutic review areas. And so it's really been a journey for us, and especially in my office, where we really try to be translators and try to translate the implications of all that great analytical data that comes with each of these biosimilars, and why we can have confidence in that. The culmination of some of our efforts was last September in the IPRP workshop. I think we were really starting to see momentum in terms of people understanding that maybe clinical studies really aren't so applicable or aren't so informative in the biosimilar space. So that's really heartening for me. And I think where we're headed is probably just more efforts to streamlining and trying to really get a consistent sort of approach going throughout the agency. We have a lot of people who touch biosimilars, and so it takes a while to get everybody on the same page.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. Yes, the FDA is quite the place, like many other health authorities. Lots of people. So I'm going to move on. Before we get into some of the elements you guys all touched upon, I believe Peter mentioned interchangeability. Of course, a couple of you guys with IPRP mentions the CES. And before we get there, let's talk a little more broadly on a couple issues. And then we'll dig a little deeper into sustainability and other topics. So much has been promised by way of improved patient access through biosimilars. No question that access has improved to biologics in some parts of the globe more than others. What is your dream? What is your vision for what biosimilars will offer to patients around the globe in the next 2 to 5 years? What policy changes may be necessary to help get you to that vision? And I invite anyone into this conversation to respond. So who's going to volunteer first is the question.
I will do it if I may.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for the question, Joseph. I hope for biosimilars over maybe the next 2 to 5 years that they become widely accessible. This in turn will enable for a more patient worldwide to benefit from high quality, cost effective biological products. Biosimilars, of course, have the potential to significantly, I think, improving healthcare equity by reducing treatment costs, and it can also increase the competition between manufacturers, and it will lead to expanding access for life-saving therapies. That's what I'm hopeful for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yvonne, I believe you want to chime in as well?
Yes, indeed. I'd just like to join this kind of wish of increasing the access to biosimilars by highlighting a couple of issues that have been improved significantly over the years. This is the progress that we saw in the past 15 years. And, thinking about 2 to 5 years, I would say this is pretty short period for, long wish lists. So maybe we can focus on 3 issues. One is that it's really important to highlight that biosimilars are actually biotherapeutics in essence. And in the cases where development of biotherapeutics is very much needed, the development of biosimilars should be really considered as part of the overall development of biotherapeutics. So rather than just focusing on biosimilars itself, I think that increasing development of biotherapeutics that will serve also as reference products in future, and increasing development of biosimilars as well, will basically lead to the increase of the access to biotherapeutic products, I would say, in the first place, independently of whether they are originators or biosimilars. My second wish is to see more improvements in terms of regulatory convergence. And this is another issue where WHO invested a lot of time and efforts through the work with regulatory authorities, with the aim to reduce differences and also to promote transparency, so that developers of biotherapeutics, including biosimilars, can clearly see what are the regulatory expectations. And as better regulatory convergence we have, and this is achievable in 2 to 5 years, I would say, to improve this area, there will be less uncertainties in terms of the development and the question about, duplications or what is expected by one agency and another. This is, I think, an area where we should all work together a bit more. And the third area is to continue with the education. We started with the education of prescribers because there were lots of uncertainties and lack of understanding what biosimilars are, what they are intended for, what the concept of biosimilarity is based on. So this education should really continue. We've been through the education of prescribers, the education of regulators, the education of patients. And I think that this third part is still very important. Of course, in 2 to 5 years, maybe it's a kind of short-term goal, but that should continue for much longer. Actually, the education should support all these other streamlines. Over.
Ivana, thank you. We couldn't agree more. I think education, we're never done learning, and health professionals are never done learning. Patients are never done learning. Before I throw it over to Sarah to get her thoughts, I do want to point out something you made, a point you made, which is great. You talked about biotherapeutics. I think that's from my perspective, I think that's exactly right. We talk about sometimes that reference products or biologics or biosimilars. It's important to understand and be in agreement and alignment that these are all biologics, and we have to have the similar expectations for, of course, reference biologics and biosimilars. They're all one. So we don't want to hold others to different standards. So I like how you phrase that, biotherapeutics. So I appreciate your response. Sarah, I believe you may wanted to chime in.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is going to happen in the next 5 years, but when you look at the history of the major benefits that generics have provided to public health in America, like just giving access to so many people to important therapies, I think the potential benefits of increasing access to biologic therapies via biosimilars is immense. I think we still have a lot of work to go before we get there, and there are a number of challenges that are within the structure of the American sort of healthcare ecosystem. But really, what makes me get up every day and do this job is the idea that if somebody needs a biologic, they can get a biologic, right? And that's really the bottom line for me. It's near and dear to my heart as a rheumatologist. You know, the TNF inhibitors really transformed rheumatology, and I still remember the days where there were people who couldn't afford TNF inhibitors and couldn't get them, and to me, that was a real problem. So that's what I am hoping to see increasingly over the next 5 years, that we work through some of these hurdles that are currently in front of us and really get these products out to more people.
Thank you, Sarah. That's exactly right. It's about access, right? Once again, about biologics, biotherapeutics. It's about access. We appreciate it. Any other comments on that question?
I suppose I'm the only one who hasn't said anything, so
I come in, but
glaringly obvious, wouldn't it? So yeah, no, I think convergence is the main thing that we're all trying to do. It's primarily from where we sit, the regulatory science, and trying to iron out some of the bumps within the legislations. And I think they're still problematic around a global environment where certain things are asked for, which we, maybe have moved on from. So getting everybody aligned is a challenge. And I guess once we have good agreement, that we can help to push that forward as well. I think also it's a bit disappointing sometimes, the procurement processes within Europe and the different countries, and it's not even. It's not something that I'm particularly involved in, but it causes barriers to uptake, I think, as well. And I think the people who work in that area can also push to try and get a more even playing field in terms of how the biosimilars are actually delivered to the patients. And a key dream for me probably is how to explain the quality to the clinical colleagues. That's really the thing that we're all trying to do now. And I think probably what comes up at times in a number of discussions really is a thing called residual uncertainty, and nobody quite knows necessarily exactly what it means, but it sounds like it means something and it needs to be solved. So I guess in the past, my perspective would be that the definitions of biological were quite a lot along the basis that the process also defined the product. But I think over the years, the analytical developments and comparability, we're very, very far away from that now, and the sort of analytical tools now do describe adequately the biological substance. So that residual uncertainty that we tried to address in the past is maybe not the same residual uncertainty that we're living with in the current climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. Yeah, it appears as we've evolved, again, and we mentioned the journey as we evolved and get, the science keeps getting better and better. It looks like the residual uncertainty, is getting smaller and smaller, if any at all. As we attempt to make this an interactive webinar, we do have a question. I know in your response, you talked about, many of you touched upon harmonization and collaboration. So get a little bit deeper dive. Question by Jillian. There seems to be no compelling arguments against streamlining, scientifically or clinically. So what, from your perspective, is holding this up? If we have the WHO revised guidelines from April 2022, what other harmonized guidelines do you think we need? And I open that up to the panel.
Well, maybe I can just quickly say, from EU side, we are working on that, and the tailored process or streamlined process is an ongoing effort. But it sort of fits a little bit with what I just said. I think that the main drivers here are trying to get communication framed in such a way that it satisfies colleagues who have a lower level of assurance of losing the clinical efficacy study. And we have to be mindful that it's a partnership across all disciplines, and the quality is a strong foundation of it all. But we still need to be able to provide a substantial message which satisfies everybody. And I think in a way the quality aspect is risk-based across a lot of different assays and quality attributes, and getting that message delivered into a way that sort of satisfies all of the, I guess, the sort of concerns of clinical colleagues is really where we're trying to find the right way of addressing that within the EMA. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I believe, Sarah, do you have your hand up?
I do. I want to sort of piggyback on what Peter was mentioning, and also sort of touch on Jillian's question. I think when we say high-level statements like, you really, the clinical studies don't really provide you with anything, it's a message that's not resonating with everybody, because again, like I said, there are a lot of people who are really comfortable with the clinical data, and it is the closest sort of portrayal of clinical effect, that providers could maybe expect to see with their patients. So I think what we really need to do is dive a little bit deeper than making sort of broad statements about how they're not useful, and really try to explain, as Peter was saying, really try to explain why are they not useful, and really try to get people to walk through the thinking and the steps with the program in front of them, as to why the clinical data are not really going to be helpful in this case. And that is really sort of the crux of what we were trying to get at in the streamlining workshop with the IPRP, and the sort of factors to consider that we're sort of noodling through right now, is that really diving down to a point where people's rationale can be sort of guided through the thinking process related to the comparative analytics, and not just the comparative analytics, but the sort of baseline expectations for the biologic in question, which is in a large part based on the reference product, right? Is it in the therapeutic plateau? Is it well characterized, et cetera, et cetera? I think these are sort of principles that are feasible to articulate, and hopefully can help drive the thought process. That's really the goal. I think getting people to just sort of give up on clinical data generally is a little bit harder.
That's helpful. Thank you, Sarah and Peter. Any other thoughts from Ali or Ivana? Okay, so let's dig a little deeper into that, like you said. Oh, okay, go ahead, Ivana. Apologies.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add that in terms of the question, what else is needed? I think that strengthening the expertise for evaluation of these products is still very much needed. And as Peter and Sarah mentioned, it's fine to have a statement that is agreeable to all parties, and that everybody is actually accepting this approach. But I think building the expertise, understanding how it works, because we always promote case-by-case application of the principles. So developing examples, publishing more on what's been done for particular cases and how this streamlined approach apply to different cases would be actually very helpful. And this is what we plan to do from WHO side, but we also we're also looking for collaboration on that matter with the others to show how it looks and how people can actually learn from the examples. That would actually help implementing the principles into practice.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So I think, for the one question here, if you need what indicated time frame by which the need for comparative exercise will go away, obviously with the response there, there is no specific time frame as we hear. But Ali, are you trying to chime in, sir? Oh, okay. Sorry. And your face popped up. All right. So let's talk. I want to dive a little deeper into what Sarah was saying as far as, the high level point of they're just not needed. It's not resonating is what she said. And it sounds like there's convincing of not only some maybe health authorities, staff, and others, clinicians, like you said, are used to seeing clinical data. Even on the outside, you'll have clinicians say they're more comfortable with that. So I ask you with this, as we look at this, developers need some certainty. As they look to develop and spend money, there's a cost to this, right? To consider what type of products they should spend money on to develop. They include the comparative clinical studies within their program development. So how can we achieve streamlined development if the timelines are not in parallel necessarily when you're thinking about studies? And more importantly, any chance of working with health authorities and thinking about pre-data commitment like we use for comparability protocols today? Would that help with more data earlier on? Would that help, once again, would that resonate a little better, Sarah and others, with some of the folks that maybe have a little more reservation with these types of issues?
So, G, if I can clarify, so you mean like the scenario where somebody comes in with a lot of comparative analytical data up front?
Yes.
I think to the extent that that's feasible, that's always helpful, right? Because if you've got kind of a clinical lot or a close to commercial or even a commercial data for your biosimilar, that is super helpful in terms of removing some of those possible residual uncertainties, right?
Sure.
Because part of the residual uncertainties is what's going to happen when you scale up, right? Mm-hmm. So I think to the extent that that's feasible, I think that'd be great. What I understand and sort of think that we can get around is that a lot of times people are sort of doing a process development and scale up at the same time that they might be wanting to do a clinical study, right? So there's more of it's done in parallel because of the duration that you need to get a clinical study done.
Right.
And then you're sort of divorcing really the relationship of analytics and clinical impact, because you're just doing both, and hopefully at the end you get you're highly similar, and then you wouldn't really expect any clinically meaningful differences. So I think the key is getting people to recognize that the current way of doing things is basically just going to end up defaulting to everyone doing a clinical study when we're not even using it to answer any residual uncertainties, right? because you a lot of times don't really even know what you're going to be uncertain about. So I think it's getting people to reframe that thinking. The stepwise approach was a big part of how we initially thought about it at FDA, and that's just not a practical thing with the development realities. You just end up doing both.
Thank you. Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you, Sarah. Before I get to one more question in the chat, any other thoughts on that as far as the timing and the pre-data commitment? Okay. We can move on. Just real quick, I see a question here, and I don't anticipate I anticipate a certain response, but one question is, do these challenges apply, and how do these challenges apply to oncology products? I imagine there's some similar challenges. Yeah, I see people shaking their head. I think it's safe to say this conversation applies to oncology products. I think it's fairly safe to say.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is kind of a prime example, right? And Peter can jump in there too, but oncology products by and large are sort of these monoclonal antibodies that inherently wouldn't pose a lot of uncertainty in terms of what differences we might see between a biosimilar and its reference product. So really, the the desire there is to protect patients, and that's why they want to see clinical data, which I totally get. But the product itself is not that challenging as a biosimilar if it's a monoclonal antibody. So it's one of these things where you're torn. As a clinician, I get why people want clinical data because the stakes are high. But at the same time, if you want to have a system that can provide these medicines at lower cost, we have to give up sort of um, our preconceived notions about what is really needed to help reassure, and that is a difficult thing. But in theory, a lot of, I mean, most oncology products are in the biologic space are monoclonal antibody based, and there should be no um, impediment to them, being done without a clinical comparative efficacy study. But it is an area that's very sensitive, and I see why.
It's helpful. Thank you, sir. I think, Peter, you were trying to chime in as well.
Yeah, it's along the lines Sarah says. The monoclonal antibody is a term, but it's sort of describes a lot of differences in complexity, whether it be just a simple binding antibody or we're getting down into more complex effector functions. And oncology products could work either way, but quite often they do have cytotoxic effects, and they will be employing effector functions. And I think there's probably an area where you could focus a little bit of the residual uncertainty concerns of clinical colleagues. Have we got enough description with the quality data and the assays that we're using to, assess those effector functions? And, can we make that argument meaningful for all of those who have the uncertainty at this present time? But I think that is for the quality colleagues to push forward with and to make sure that that's a good argument. And I think by and large most people do agree essentially that the performance of a molecule is due to the structure of the molecule, and if we can describe it well and do effective assays that capture all of the relevant functional aspects through our orthogonal assay approach, then it provides a robust way to provide the assurance. But I think with the fact that there are different types of antibodies, there may be a slightly staged kind of way forward for some of these products on a risk basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Peter. Before we leave this, there's some good questions from the chat as well. Before I go there, this ties into a little bit when you talk about residual uncertainties. And of course, we talk about from an industry perspective how there's some uncertainties regarding, you need certainties when you think about doing research, developing a product. With that, you've all heard, of course, about the biosimilar void, and where some numbers have shown about 50% of the originator biologics facing loss of exclusivity within the next 10 years have no biosimilars in development. Number one, is this something you guys are seeing or experiencing? Is it real? Number one, and what do you think we could do to get beyond that, to get more companies to look at developing if this really is a void? So, is this void real?
Can I answer that, Giuseppe, if I may?
Yes, really. Yes, please.
I think one of the issues we have here is that we have about 40 biosimilars already licensed. However, we have a challenge when it comes to biosimilars uptake and how much of them is actually being used by the patients. When it comes to the biosimilar void, I think some of the solutions would be, maybe it will take some time before we get to that, but I think there should be simplification for the regulatory pathways with a focus more on analytical PK and PD data. There should be financial incentives for manufacturers to get into the biosimilar development pathways. There should be a promotion of global regulatory collaboration to reduce duplication when it comes to what kind of data and studies should be conducted. And finally, I think we can support market competition through pricing and reimbursement policies that would support biosimilars. I think these measures may and can boost biosimilar development and improve patient access to biosimilars in the near future. Thank you, Joseph.
That was a great response. Thank you very much, Ali. Any other thoughts about the biosimilar void?
Well, Peter here, I can say, we've seen, the research done by IQVIA and, how that's shed light on it in terms of not only the huge growth that's actually foreseen for biosimilars in coming years, but also the fact that developers are focusing on the substances which pay back a greater margin and not really so interested in the ones that are marginal in terms of return. So, I think from our side, what we would say from regulators is it's a public health issue we want to try and drive. We can't divorce it from commercial considerations, but, ultimately, we think also along the lines of, why do we do clinical trials if we're subjecting patients to a trial which is maybe a little bit redundant? There's been a discussion of the ethical aspects of that, and maybe they could be enrolled in other trials which are more progressive even for the originator product perhaps, but those things all come into the same mix, and at the end of the day we're mindful of trying to make the whole regulatory process as sort of meaningful as possible, and streamlined is a good word because that's where we're trying to go. It has, and I've been in this for 20 years. At the start, it was obvious that it was quite conservative from the beginning, and there were a lot of conservative voices who fed into the overall framework, even in EU guidelines at the start. So it's being whittled down over time, and I think the very substantive evidence that we have over the years in terms of safety and efficacy of biosimilars is a very good argument that we can go further and hopefully open up some of those products that are somewhat on the precipice of the void, and we can get some developers into working on those particular molecules. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ali. Any other thoughts before I move on to another audience question?
So I'll just, I think Peter really hit the nail on the head for that question. I don't know how real the void is, like how big the void is, but I'm sure there is some sort of a void. And I do have a feeling that it's probably due to sort of, how much you're going to spend in development versus how much you can hope to make, a company can hope to make off of it, right? So that's another area, as Peter mentioned, where if we can streamline things and make development less expensive by cutting unnecessary studies, then that would be potentially helpful for encouraging development of products that might otherwise not be that attractive.
No, I appreciate that. That's fair. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, sir. I think that's fair. I think we've seen numbers that when you talk about research and development costs upwards around 30 to 50% of the development of a biosimilar could be the CES. So to your point, Sarah, if we can find out a way, if it truly is where Peter mentioned, maybe developers are only going after these products that potentially can get a return, right? If they only got, maybe what's going to happen is if we can reduce that cost, they'll start going after more and more products because the cost is more reasonable to develop. And of course, what this leads to down the road is better access to patients, hopefully not only, but all parts of the world. So we appreciate that. I wanted to ask, and it was bound to come up eventually during the chat. I know it was mentioned, Peter mentioned the word, and Sarah, I'm sure she thought it was coming, but can we talk a little bit about interchangeability? Well, while I don't think she's a procrastinator, or excuse me, Proscott, I don't think you can tell the future is what I'm trying to say, Sarah. So you don't have to use the exact year, but then Peter once again mentioned interchangeability. Sarah knew this was coming, but can you tell us about interchangeability? And do you think we get further and further away from this term, or at least we modify it to a degree where it's not ripe for misinformation as it's been in the past? So where, Sarah and Peter and others, do you think we are on interchangeability?
So maybe I'll start, since the US is one of the few countries that has a sort of legal definition of interchangeability. I do think that it's a big source of confusion and misinformation, because we're not talking about interchangeability in the colloquial sense, right? If you ask me in the colloquial sense, are biosimilars free to be substituted for their reference product? I would say yes, right? That's the whole point of them. And would we approve something if we were worried that if they got changed for each other, there would be some major catastrophe? I think that would be a potential safety concern that we wouldn't be able to ignore. So I do think that ultimately the distinction that in the US law, where we have interchangeables which can be substituted at the pharmacy level, and biosimilars which require a specific prescription by name, I think that distinction is a legal one, but it's not like a practical one. So to the extent that we can make the law less confusing, I'm all for it. I don't know if 2025 will be the year, but I'm hoping that that we can make the situation less confusing in the US market.
Thank you, Sarah. And I will give an opportunity to Peter. You mentioned interchangeability in your opening, but yeah, this is unfortunately largely US. Peter, do you want any comments? If not, that's fine.
Well, I can just say that, we've had a looser view of interchangeability in terms of its definition, and it probably would have covered both, the switching on a prescription or substitution at a pharmacy level in Europe. And essentially, it was really up to the member states to implement, uptake and delivery of biosimilars according to their own needs. But it still caused confusion. And as I said, eventually it was a happy day whenever we were able to produce a statement on behalf of the network that assured, based on the experience that we have, that biosimilars can be interchanged and there should be no concerns amongst users in doing so. And I think it's found a firm place in terms of providing that assurance, and has been a valuable clarification, let's say. Thank you.
That's very helpful from both. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to what I believe is a really good question, because I know we talk about this and have talked about real world evidence for some time now. So in the chat, it asks two questions. Do you think real world evidence may play an increasing role in the future acceptance of biosimilars? And I'd love to get your opinions on that. And then what they do want to know also, are there any current initiatives in that sense? So do you think real world evidence may play an increasing role in future acceptance of biosimilars? And I could throw it out to the whole panel. I think someone, Ivana, maybe did you raise your hand?
Yes, I just wanted to say, yes, of course, we need to continue generating and building this evidence, but also evaluating what is happening in real settings, which is actually part of building the trust for the use of biosimilars, which is a key. And I think this is really playing an important role. And that was part of my previous comment, saying that building the expertise, providing the examples, showing how it works in real setup is really making a huge difference. And then, of course, having more publications and more opportunities to discuss this, where developers and regulators can actually sit together. And this is what we believe that we will continue with the implementation workshops that WHO has organized in the past, that we will do now to facilitate implementation of the principles outlined in the guidelines from April 2022. That would really help. And maybe I can take the opportunity to address another question, if you don't mind, because it was specifically targeting WHO guidelines. And the question was, is there a risk that there will be a deliberate misunderstanding of streamlining approach? In my opinion, there is much less risk of misinterpretations at this point in time comparing to what we saw 15 years ago when we published the first set of guidance. I think in the meantime, we managed to educate the users of WHO standards and guidance, and also users of other guidance documents, that people today have much better understanding of these key principles. The issue of streamlined approach is really case-by-case scenario, for which I think that more review of examples and case studies and discussions between developers and regulatory evaluators is very much needed. But of course, this is not the end of the story. To make improved access to biosimilars, there is a lot more needed, but this is one of the key issues. So in response to the question from Thomas, actually, I don't see a risk of this misinterpretation, but nevertheless, we will provide this workshop type of implementation to facilitate a better understanding and appropriate application of the principle to each case study scenario. Over.
Thank you, Ivana. Before I move on, I saw a hand up. Did anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I think it'd be awesome if we could use real world evidence instead of, like a prospective controlled clinical study. And we do have a couple of research projects under the BASUFA, the Biosimilar User Fee Act regulatory science pilot program that we're specifically sort of exploring what are the challenges, where are we at? And I have to say that, the challenges are real with real world evidence, in the sense that a lot of times people just are not collecting all the data that you might want, right? I mean, it's a practical thing, because whenever you have registries, or, even if you were able to sort of mine EHRs or administrative databases, there's always kind of a limit, and there's a lot of variability as to what people want or need or collect for various reasons. So what you end up with is basically a lot of noise, and then it's difficult. You can say maybe we don't see anything, but is it because there's a lot of noise? Is it the data just aren't sensitive enough to see anything, or is it because there's truly not anything worrisome out there? So I think there are still a lot of initiatives that need to happen in order to, say, for example, standardized data collection and things like that in the real world setting, that would enable sort of more intentional exploration of patient experience with these products in a way that would be interpretable.
Thank you very much, Ivana and Sarah. Appreciate it. Any other thoughts before I kind of change the topic a little bit? All right. So, the brief presentation early on talked about streamlining development. We also talked about single global development, single global comparator, which we have not touched upon yet during the Q&A. So I want to talk briefly about that. And it ties into, of course, potentially the void, we talked about as far as, the use of a single global comparator can significantly lower development costs and may entice, of course, companies to go after certain products where they may not have been enticed to do so before. Now, many jurisdictions say not using a global comparator is a statutory limitation. So if it is, are there creative regulatory solutions that could be employed to get closer to this objective of using a single global comparator? And for example, would a global regulator consider eliminating a three-way PK comparison, for example? Any thoughts?
Maybe I could just come in initially. I think from our side in Europe, we did push for wider use of a reference product or comparator across clinical studies, and it's not something that's necessarily fitted quite so easily with legislation, but it is there, and it's something that we do, and it's a good solution, I think, to a lot of the development needs. But I'd be interested maybe from your side, Giuseppe, as well, in terms of what is a global comparator, because does that mean it's applicable to every jurisdiction everywhere in the world, or the main regulatory authorities, or trying to break down all of the barriers? Is that the kind of intention and direction that would be going?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I don't want to speak for all of industry. I think it'd be a good conversation to have. But I think, it's simply, put, as far as I understand, is we have industries manufacturing facilities across the globe. But of course, if they make a product, it may come from one facility. With of course, they've got some resiliency if there's another one or two that makes the product. But if it comes from the same facility, they feel that can be just one comparator, which ideally would be the more jurisdictions that would accept it, the better, right? But even if you work with some of the stringent ones and ideally get them to buy in, that would of course help harmonize and get others to go that route as well.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of along the lines of mutual recognition of regulatory practice in different jurisdictions, and it's probably something that still needs additional work, and it's probably more even at a higher level amongst the driving forward on how we get broader mutual recognition, and we've done a lot of that with GMP over the years, I think. So I think the global comparator does sit on that topic to some extent, and where we've got mutual recognition of GMP assessments, etc., then I think you're in a good position to support the global comparator from those jurisdictions. But I think that needs to be rolled out further, and it's a wider topic probably than just biosimilars.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. Wider topic than just biosimilars. You're right, and that goes to the earlier question regarding real-world evidence, as far as essentially that applies to all, not just biosimilars. To Jillian's question. Any other thoughts on that? I have one hand up, and then we'll get to another question. I think maybe Sarah.
Yeah. So I know global comparators are a big topic, and certainly would be helpful for streamlining. I think there are a couple of challenges that we face in the U.S., and one is, our legislation really calls specifically for comparison to the U.S. reference product. Our determinations have to be made with respect to the U.S. reference product. So how the connections that enable you to make that kind of determination have to be there in some form scientifically. So I think that can be a challenge. I think also there are reliance issues that come into play that might throw some extra hurdles along in terms of being able to utilize maybe information that is already out there or known, between regulators. So I think there's some challenges. I think they're mainly legal. I don't think they're necessarily scientific. And I also would hope that we can streamline bridging as much as possible so that we're just connecting the links to the US reference product and not asking for additional stuff. But everybody likes more data. So it's a hard instinct to fight, right?
Yeah, that is always the challenge, and then what not only more, but the right data, right, Sarah? They want the data they want to see, so we appreciate that. Just a quick little note that we have about 15 minutes left, so we've got a really good question from Jody on the chat. We can get into. Thank you, Jody. Are the panelists? Can you guys provide any sneak peeks with respect to the IPRP Biosimilars Working Group white paper on clinical trial tailoring that will be published later this year? So that's the first one. And what's next for IPRP Working Group, the Biosimilar Working Group, is further work in this plan. So I'll stop and ask the first one. Can you provide any sneak peeks with respect to the IPRP Biosimilar Working Group white paper on clinical trial tailoring that will be published later this year? So I guess we could probably shoot that to Sarah and Ali first.
I feel like I'm dominating the conversation. I don't know if Ali, you wanna jump in there and give any sneak peeks.
No sneak peeks.
We should go, Ali.
No sneak
You'll
peeks.
find out soon enough.
Okay. How about this? If no sneak peeks, Ali. Okay, but what's next for the IPRP Biosimilar Working Group? What's next?
I think the major issue that we are discussing right now is what is the greatest barrier to access to biosimilars, and the other thing is how there can be global harmonization when it comes to regulations of biosimilars. Therefore, this will allow for a lower development cost of biosimilars. It will lead to regulatory convergence, increase awareness, and at the end of the day, it will support the market dynamics for biosimilars.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you. Yeah.
So I will say that, we are trying to help people noodle through the rationale for when you might actually need a clinical study versus when you might not need a clinical study. I think we talk a lot about that. ICH Q5E has the factors to consider that are used in the comparability space that I think have a lot of relevance to differences that you might see in a comparative analytical assessment. So I think people just need to kind of be able to connect the dots, as it were, in the rationale, and clinicians who often look at clinical data need to be able to connect the dots. And so we're trying to flesh out for people the thought process, rather than sort of make a broader statement about clinical studies being needed. I think part of what's driving that is also there is a little bit of more heterogeneity in the biologic space than the very common platforms that we see, right? The monoclonal antibodies, for example. There is very well characterized heterogeneity among the monoclonal antibodies, but biologics is a pretty big group of potential products, and there are going to be some that you actually do want comparative efficacy data for because you just don't know how to interpret things. And so we want to leave space for that kind of scenario, at the same time driving people away from comparative efficacy studies as a default in the most common scenarios. So that's really what the goal is. Hopefully we'll we'll be able to describe a little better what the thinking process is in a white paper, and help our colleagues who are making these decisions day by day to sort of really incorporate that kind of scientific rationale. That's the goal.
It's completely reasonable. Thank you. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Sarah. We have about 10 minutes late. There's a question specifically for Peter, which we'll get to. We'll answer this question, and then we'll move on to some final thoughts, give you guys the final word. So, Peter, you get the last chat question. Peter, will EMEA, and you talked about the reflection paper in your opening response, Peter, will the EMEA be ready to accept streamlining and or tailoring proposals, for example, or that is without CES, once the draft reflection paper will be published next year?
Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks, Martin, for raising that. Well, I guess it depends a little bit on what we're accepting. We have different procedures, so scientific advice is one, MAAs are another, but I think it probably relates more to an actual application for marketing. We're working towards that. As I've said, there's a ongoing discussion. I think it's a little bit of a risk-based sort of scenario at the moment for companies in terms of what you're prepared to commit to without necessarily a hard, fast guideline. But I think that's often been the case in the biosimilars field. We will regulate, and it has to be based on experience as well. So quite often companies will be providing us with their proposals, and we're giving positive support to it, but it will be caveated to some extent. So I think in terms of scientific advice, that there is some activity in this area already, and I think things we said are things you need to take into consideration to manage the risks and the residual uncertainty as you move forward towards developing a product for MAA. And I can't necessarily tell you whether the reflection paper will draw a line in the sand and suddenly the world will change, but it's an evolutionary kind of way forward. And I think if you consider it on a risk-based approach, and simpler stuff first with robust quality is probably the best way forward. And if you take off a big bite now, it might not all be easy to swallow, but smaller bites might be more manageable in terms of how you stage the portfolio, perhaps in terms of this streamlined approach. Thanks.
Thank you. Very helpful, Peter. All right, with a few minutes left, I'm going to give an opportunity for individuals in our fine panelists to get the last word, and then I want to give some thanks out after that. But let me start with Ivana. Ivana, you talked about, of course, the WHO guideline from 2022. You talked about education, much like other panelists. With your last word, can you just tell us your thoughts? And then also, can you tell us anything planned as far as to help further educate others in any events plan that you may want to be able to get the word more broadly out on that 2022 guideline?
Yeah, this is really what we are now thinking about, and basically preparing series of workshops to address these issues, and to work with colleagues that are leading similar initiatives in a different context. So the next step is really the implementation workshop that has been planned for a while, and maybe this is good because this is a good moment to mention the World Diabetic Day today, with biosimilar insulin. So insulins developed as biosimilars, which will be one of the case studies that we would like to discuss with the regulators and developers of these products in the next workshop, which is planned for the beginning of July next year. And also, we plan to continue discussion on monoclonal antibodies, as several colleagues also mentioned today, that a lot of complexities are really related to monoclonal antibodies due to different development process, due to different intended use, due to complexity on its own that they have. So this will be also further discussion. The most important issue is really also to explore options for improving regulatory convergence and to promote the concept of regulatory reliance. And that's why we are actually organizing the next WHO workshop that will be hosted by our colleagues in the Eastern Mediterranean region, with participation of regulators from that region as well as from African region, because these two regions probably have more needs to work on this area, while in the other parts of the world we already held a number of workshops and made important improvements. So that's where we are, and that's what we are planning to do next year.
Ivana, thank you very much. We look forward to those workshops, those educational opportunities, and look forward to continue our working relationship with IGBA and WHO. So we thank you. Let me ask Ali, any final words in a minute or less, sir?
I just want to thank you for setting this up. I want to thank my colleagues. As always, it's a privilege, and thanks, of course, to the audience and for the questions and for participation and support. Good luck and Godspeed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And one final note from our last two. Peter, any final thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's biosimilars has been around for a long time, it seems to me, and it seems like I've been around a long time as well now. But it's as dynamic as ever, and it's still challenging and exciting, and it's continuing with momentum. So, looking forward to what happens next. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Peter. And Sarah, Yim with a Y, your final thoughts.
My final thoughts are, I'm really excited for what's ahead. I'm very optimistic. I think we're seeing a lot of people really trying to understand biosimilars and how they're similar or maybe could be handled differently from the reference products. So I think people are really starting to get on the bandwagon, and that gives me a reason for hope.
That's fantastic, and hope's a good thing. Yeah, we've seen great progress here, of course, in speaking from the U.S. perspective. We really enjoy working with IGBA and our international collaborators, and we enjoy and we thank you guys for joining us. So thank you again to the four panelists, Ivana, Ali, Peter, and Sarah. We really appreciate your insights and your comments. We, some of the questions were fairly blunt, so we appreciate that. We appreciate your responses. I would like to take a moment before we close here in about a minute. Would like to take a moment to give my thanks to all the folks who actually made this happen. That starts with IGBA leadership. That's Susanna, Nicholas, and Carletta. Thank you very much. Thank you to the Global Biosimilar Week Task Force, which is Jody Cox and Ashley Henyon, who's facilitated this webinar. And I appreciate all my colleagues in IGBA and beyond to help facilitate this and make this happen. So we appreciate it. We look forward to the continued working relationship to make sure we can continually improve biosimilar access, not just here, but globally and all across the globe. We also wish to look forward to working with you on how we can truly streamline the development of biosimilars, where we can get more products out there. Again, thank you very much. We appreciate the audience attention, and you guys can all have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. A big thank you to our panelists, as well as IGBA, for helping to set up this webinar and also for hosting Global Biosimilars Week. The full version of this webinar is going to be available on the centerforbiosimilars.com as well as globalbiosimilarsweek.com in the coming days. It might take us a little bit to get the full video up online, but it will be available for everyone for free. So thank you again for everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of Global Biosimilars Week. Thank you very much.